Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's our Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today our wonderful guest is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Oh, thank you, Sasha. Nice to know that I've graduated to being your wonderful guest.
Yeah, it's taking time, but
aside from being your only guest, but
it's only and wonderful at the same time. Can you imagine
hey, if I'm going to be the only one, I might as well be
what a
wonderful.
rarity situation it is?
Oh,
I would like to start with that. I talked yesterday to my friend. He was sick for a little while. I haven't talked to him for about few weeks, probably a month. And we discussed Ukrainian situation for an hour and a half. And for some reason, I always send him links to our shows, and he's watching all our shows. But for some reason, I had a feeling that he doesn't support our position or my position 100% of the time, 90% of the time, maybe 65, maybe even less. So, but I didn't want to muddy the water and ask him exactly what percentage are you supporting our views and so on. So I didn't really. I said nothing about him. I haven't called him for the last few weeks. So yesterday when he called me and we talked for an hour and a half, and he apologized that he didn't call me for a long time. Now, the reason that he didn't call me for a long time, he was actually sick. He had some infection in his leg and so on. And it was already at the end of the conversation. And I told him, I'm also apologize that I didn't call you as well. But the reasons that I didn't call you was that I had a feeling that you are not supporting our shows, and you in disagreements for several points with everything what we are stating. So he started to deny it vehemently, and he said, absolutely not true. I'm not supporting you 100%, so it's 99.5%.
okay.
Okay, it's a
Take
very
it.
impressive number. So what that 0.5% where you are not supporting us? I would like to know it exactly. He says, well, the only 0.5% that I would not support is, I think that, in my opinion, the most important thing now is to stop the fire and start saving people's life. I believe that you never said that you were against it, but there are several reasons why, even if you would support it, but it would come as number 5, 6, 12 priority in everything what you're suggesting. So I said, okay, I would like to tell you this. As you know, the only reason why I'm against it, and probably Jonathan Lockwood, but we will be able to ask him very soon, is that so the most, um, so to say, realistic scenario is to have conflict frozen on where every side is at the moment. Okay,
Similar to Korea.
similar to Korea. So it's you stop right there, and then there is no more fire, no more people are dead, and then you are going. And I ask, okay, you're going where? Well, you'll have a peace. And so, oh, really? And who is going to guarantee that peace? What's happening if 3, 6, 9 months Russia will regroup and will bring 2 million people and a million Koreans and 5 million Chinese and whoever else they're planning to bring, and will attack Ukraine from all south, east, north, Belarusia, and so on. And what Ukraine is going to do in this case? Well, you have to have agreements and so on. Oh, Budapest 94, maybe that type of agreement? Oh, well, yeah, you have to find out what kind of agreement. So I say, as soon as anybody will find out and will let me know, I will be with both hands. I will be for peace, ceasefire, immediate. So, Jonathan, what do you think about it?
Yeah. Well, someone believe it or not, at my 50-year high school reunion about a year or so ago,
Hmm.
they asked me, they asked me my opinion on the situation in Russia, Ukraine, and I said that right now the two sides have irreconcilable political objectives. They cannot be resolved through normal diplomacy. Any agreement that in any way rewards Russia for having started the war against Ukraine, that is not a peace treaty. That is a treaty of appeasement, very similar in nature to the 1938 Munich Agreement. It simply postpones the inevitable. The Munich Agreement did not involve fighting at the time, but eventually, because of its appeasement nature, it eventually did result in World War II. So here you have a situation where you have two nations with irreconcilable political objectives, two sides which are inherently unwilling to compromise or to reach a halfway point, because for Ukraine to compromise with Russia at this point would only reward it for having started the war in whatever measure. And Russia would use that interval to rebuild, restock, reinforce, mobilize, etc., and then begin as you have stated your fear, simply begin the war again at a time of its choosing. What the other nations in the NATO alliance have increasingly recognized is that Russia must be stopped here, now. They must be stopped from being able to rebuild for future offensives against members of the NATO alliance, which more than one Russian military and political leader have stated would be their overall objective. So, given that situation, I would not support any ceasefire merely for the sake of obtaining a ceasefire. That is not. It's like war and diplomacy. Clausewitz stated that war is a continuation. War is a continuation of politics or diplomacy by other means. War is not separate from diplomacy. Diplomacy manages conflict through peaceful means, nonviolent means. War is a continuation through violent means. War and diplomacy are one big continuum. They are not separate from each other. Diplomacy does not stop once war begins. Just as when war stops, diplomacy does not take over. It is all managing conflict, one long continuum. And people who do not recognize that tend to be in favor of things like a ceasefire, treating it in terms of isolation, as if merely stopping the violence solves the problem. It does not. The disagreement, the irreconcilable differences between the two parties will exist, regardless of whether or not there is a ceasefire. Given that, and given Russia's attitude and its definition of security, безопасность, which means, as you know, without danger, Russia must be compelled, forced to accept a ceasefire and a peace as having no other alternative. And the only way that is achieved is through strength, is through both diplomatic strength and military strength which makes the cost of continuing the conflict too high for even Russia to take. So given that, I would disagree with your friend. Simply stopping the fighting, just as stopping the fighting between North Korea and South Korea, it only solved the immediate short-range problem of the continued violence. It did not solve the overall conflict between the Koreas. President Eisenhower, as you recall, when the Chinese were there locked in combat with UN forces and US forces, President Eisenhower threatened to use nuclear weapons to bring the conflict to an end. And as one observer has pointed out, in order to threaten to use nuclear weapons, you have to be credible. In other words, the other side has to truly believe that your leader will, in fact, willing to use nuclear weapons. Well, the Chinese believed Eisenhower. They believed it. A lot of other people believed Eisenhower too.
2 years later, Khrushchev also believed.
Yes. He believed in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Would Kennedy, in fact, be willing to? When Kennedy said in that speech, he says, "It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any missile launched from the island of Cuba as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, necessitating a full retaliatory response by the United States upon the Soviet Union. You couldn't put it any more clearly than that.
Hey,
And
so
they believed him.
Jonathan, why Putin is not learning something from great people of history like Kennedy? He could tell Ukrainians and US Americans that one missile on Russian territory, whether it's Atacms missile or Sky Shadow or any Storm Shadow or whatever, it is attack of United States and UK against Russia, and Russia will respond accordingly. Why he's not doing that?
Well, for one thing, is that the strategic balance, particularly the nuclear balance, is not nearly as much in his favor as the nuclear balance was by the United States over the Soviet Union during the Cuban Missile Crisis. At that time, at this time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States had 130 intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had maybe about 30, and again, a lot of those were above ground. They could have been destroyed by bombers. So the United States had a 4-to-1 superiority in missiles that could get a comparatively small number that could reach the Soviet Union. But in addition to that, the United States had thousands of B-52s and B-58s, which could deliver tens of thousands, theoretically, in principle, of nuclear weapons, including thermonuclear hydrogen bombs on the Soviet Union. The United States is in full production of its nuclear arsenal. So it had a tremendous nuclear superiority over the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had a comparatively small capability for striking the United States back. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was, at least in theory, if you wargame it out, the last opportunity at that time that the United States actually could have won a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union would have been destroyed, absolutely. The United States would have suffered potentially millions of casualties, but the United States would have survived. The Soviet Union would not have survived. The situation now is much different. Technically, Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, but it's not by a tremendous margin. And the United States is a very close second. And then when you add in all of the other nuclear arsenals of its allies and you factor those in, when you add those up, Russia is going against a numerically superior opponent. We could, in theory, we could strike the Russia with more nuclear weapons than they would have to. They would have to spread their targets out against a number of opponents. All of our allies and the United States could all concentrate our fire against Russia. So it is not the same situation. Putin cannot credibly threaten a massive retaliatory response without calling down his own destruction.
But interestingly enough, Zelensky just last week, I think, he did absolutely brilliant thing by mentioning possibility of making Ukraine a nuclear power, which status they had before 1994, and which was taken away by Russia, and Russia was signatory to the document that it would never attack Ukraine and would never pretend on its territories or so on, which is violated grossly in 2014 and now in 2022. Now, what's interesting about, the more I think about it, first of all, it's very interesting thing that when he mentions it to get Ukraine nuclear status, he didn't say necessarily that it would require so many years to build these nuclear weapons or warheads and so on. He didn't mention that. So
it seemed to me that Zelensky's unstated implication, was that if Ukraine chose to go nuclear, become a nuclear power, that they could do so relatively quickly.
There is another possibility is, if you remember 1994, Russia was in disarray still, and Ukraine and so on. I don't think that both sides were very meticulous of disposing all 100% of warheads. It could have been 98% or so on. I could even imagine situation where
So
Ukrainians would call Russian and say, "Oh, you forgot two more warheads," and Russian
yeah,
would say,
right.
"Oh, go to hell. We don't need them."
It's quite plausible and conceivable that Ukraine may well have sequestered, shall we say, a number of nuclear warheads that they found or decided to appropriate and keep for possible future use or incorporation into their own delivery systems. And in effect, the Ukraine may be in the process of creating its own nuclear Polynitsa.
Absolutely. So this is a very ambiguous situation where, okay, he said something about nuclear ideas. So, okay, is he going to build them? And how long it will take? Oh, what if he's already built them? What if he already has them since 1994? A few warheads here and there.
It's like a poker game. Sasha, it's just like a poker game.
A poker game.
He's 7-card stud. You know, Zelensky has a couple of cards that he's not showing, and he's relying on the uncertainty principle in deterrence to exercise a restraining effect.
And what if he goes all in and you're sitting across the table and you're, oh my God, what am I going to do? What if he already has it? Am I a fool to go all in against him? No, I'm not going to do it. Why should I?
And that may be what Zelensky is counting on.
Mm-hmm.
He is counting on the restraining power of uncertainty, not having full or complete knowledge of what the opponent has or what the opponent intends to do. So it's in some cases, some might liken it to a nuclear game of chicken. And you know what the game of chicken was. It's where two teenagers driving towards each other at top speed in a car, in their respective cars, and the idea is to keep going, like you're going to ram the other person, and you're hoping that one person chickens out and turns away at the last second. Most of the time, someone would chicken out and turn away at the last second. Sometimes, rarely, they both rammed into each other and lost their lives. So
sure,
that's why that game isn't played anymore, at least as far as we know.
Yeah, because their car insurance would skyrocket.
Assuming they survive the accident. You know?
Yeah, assuming that, exactly. So they must have pretty sturdy cars in order to do these races. But what's interesting, when you mention about the Korean armistice, it's very interesting that North Korea sent, for different publications, there are 10 to 12,000 people. So they were equipped with the Russian uniforms and some weapons, I don't know what kind, or so on. Now, South Korea said that they are ready to send their troops to Ukraine to fight for Ukraine. So here we go. They cannot fight in Korea, but they can fight in Ukraine. Nobody forbids that.
Exactly. Now that would be a very welcome development for Ukraine.
Absolutely,
for obvious reasons. It might also have a knock-on effect, additional effect of encouraging the NATO allies to say, "Hey, the South Koreans have joined in. Now if we join in and we also reinforce Ukraine, this would further discourage Russia because Russia doesn't have many more allies." And then if you throw in another X factor, let's assume that in the upcoming presidential election, President Trump, as the indicators seem to be showing that despite all the conflicting reports and analyses, it seems to be that Trump has at least a moderately better chance of winning the presidency, along with the Republicans retaking the Senate, and possibly the Republicans even retaining control of the House. In which case, one of the things that President Trump has declared that he would do that would at least indirectly help Ukraine would be his so-called drill baby drill policy, where they're greatly expanding, and his purpose is to expand U.S. energy production, oil production, so as to drive down the price of oil in cooperation with Saudi Arabia, which is also increasing its production. That will drive down the price of oil. What that does is that hurts Russia, which depends upon oil exports in order to be able to get the revenue to fund its war effort. That will hurt Russia's ability to fund and maintain its offensive against Ukraine. So he can do that, and that gives him many more options with which to support Ukraine without having to overtly commit U.S. troops or anything like that. The NATO allies would, with lower energy prices and lower oil prices, could also be emboldened by South Korea's action. If they commit troops to Ukraine, they would also be emboldened to join in and help Ukraine and help occupy. And it would also, not only would it help there, if that forced Russia to stop and withdraw, then those troops that are present in Ukraine could also assist in accelerating the rebuilding of Ukraine. Accelerate with restoring the infrastructure, repairing the damage, clearing out minefields, etc., etc. All those things would be useful effects. So the development of South Korea wanting to go ahead and send some of its troops to Ukraine to reinforce is very positive.
Sorry, not only troops, they have also weapons that they're going to send to Ukraine. And those weapons, I'm not familiar with it, but some of them are quite high quality weapons, unlike North Koreans. And they would be very welcome.
Oh, yes. And the thing is, that's also a positive development because, as we have seen over the course of this entire war, the Ukrainians are exceptionally skilled at taking whatever weapons they are given and successfully incorporating them into their defense, and sometimes exceeding the exceeding the capabilities with which we thought we were giving them, doing even better with the weapons that we have given them. So I'm counting upon Ukrainian ingenuity and inventiveness to be able to make superior use of whatever they are given by South Korea.
John, then I'm surprised how come Russians so far are not complaining that, look, Ukraine is getting their weapons from United States, from UK, from France, from Germany, from South Korea, so very soon coming, and Poland, and many
Well, our response would be very simple. We like the Ukrainians more than we like you.
But, that scenario about lowering substantially oil prices, but similar situations happened shortly after 1983, when there was a fiasco of Russians shooting the South Korean airliner, and Reagan announced that it's an evil empire about Soviet Union. And guess what? By 85, 86, all of a sudden, the oil prices went down to about $6 a barrel in 86.
And Americans began buying gas guzzling cars.
Now, what's happened at the time? I'm interested to find out your opinion, because I even read a book by Igor Gaidar, Gibel Imperii, The Death of Empire. And he's a political scientist and so on, and he's analyzing one of the primarily reasons that Soviet Union went down was oil prices. And then he is stopping very short of accusing US of manipulating oil prices, because he's saying that although it would be beneficial for United States to do so, but oil market is so huge that no one country, even United States, can manipulate its prices. So he's staying short of accusing US. And I'm curious, is he right in his?
Well, let's see. I'm going to wait until your picture catches up with me.
He's just
there you go. Right. but actually, not so much manipulation, but manipulation in the sense that, for example, President Trump, or should he regain the presidency, it would not be so much manipulation as simply taking advantage of supply and demand by increasing the supply, by increasing U.S. oil production, fracking and so forth. That increases the supply of oil globally. That naturally drives the prices down.
So it's not manipulation, it's a means of affecting oil
Yes,
prices.
it means affect, because for President Trump, that accomplishes increasing the supply of energy, accomplishes two purposes. One, it reduces Russia's ability to finance its war effort. It's an indirect effect. The direct effect is to increase the supply of energy, which in turn drives down energy prices for Americans. And it also, as he has pointed out, has other effects such as reducing food prices and all other prices that depend upon energy in order to be implemented. So it has driving down the price of energy, and specifically oil and natural gas. All of that benefits the U.S. citizenry, which, after all, President Trump is trying to gain the support of. It does that, but it also has additional side effects, which are natural benefits of his having done that. So then the fact is that Saudi Arabia is for its own purposes, because they want to get a larger share of the oil market, and they're willing to increase production in order to increase supply and drive down the price. That is a mutual interest which Saudi Arabia, for its own reasons, is in effect cooperating with the United States. Not a deliberate strategy, but a fortunate one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's only you have to be mindful of effect on the climate, which that will happen. However, it's not scientifically proven that it affects so much the climate.
That's an interesting question, because the reason that the so-called climatologists and the anthropogenic climate change people who claim that man is responsible for climate change, I would tend to disagree with that, because our influence is relatively limited, and they're claiming that we are in effect increasing carbon dioxide emissions and that is somehow contributing to global warming. Well, they ignore two things. They ignore two facts. One, that as you increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, its heat trapping effect decreases logarithmically. In other words, if you double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the amount of heating does not double. It's considerably less. Agreed. Number two, the most obvious fact that the anthropogenic climate change people ignore or choose not to mention is that carbon dioxide is, after all, plant food. Carbon dioxide feeds plant growth. If plants could talk, they would all be lobbying, saying, "Give us more carbon dioxide," because of the carbon dioxide level in the world is right now at 420 parts per million. Okay, that's 0.04% of the Earth's atmosphere. As you know, the Earth's atmosphere consists of 78% nitrogen, 22% oxygen, or a little less, 77, 22. In that remaining 1% is a host of other gases, trace gases, among which is carbon dioxide. And you have all of that, and the carbon dioxide level in 1850, which is when most anthropogenic climate change people say that's when the problem started. Well, the carbon dioxide level then was 280 parts per million. It has been going up slowly ever since 1850 until it has now reached 420. Well, you might say, that's a lot. Well, not when you consider that at the end, the geologists had determined that at the end of the last ice age, about 10,000 years ago, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was at a planetary all-time low, 181 parts per million. And the reason that's so serious is that geologists and others have determined that if the carbon dioxide level gets to 150 parts per million or below, all plant life on Earth dies, because it would be unable to sustain plant growth of any kind, and we would basically starve to death. We came perilously close. We were perilously close to that threshold at the end of the last ice age, and it was slowly beginning to recover through all those hundreds and thousands of years since then. And we should actually, given the fact that in previous geologic ages, the carbon dioxide level was at one point as high as 8,000 parts per million.
Wow.
That's when you had tremendous plant growth during
And
the dinosaur.
dinosaurs and other wonderful creatures.
Yes, so you're seeing but you needed that plant growth to sustain the life forms that were on Earth at the time. So you have all this remarkably high levels of carbon dioxide, and yet you didn't have there was no runaway global warming, no such thing. Instead, you have these remarkably high levels of plant growth. So now, basically, I would say, go ahead and drill. Go ahead and generate the carbon dioxide. You could get up to 800 or even higher parts per million in the Earth's atmosphere, and the only visible effect that would result is you would have increased crop growth. You would have increased crop yields, higher levels of crop yields, ability to grow food. So I would argue strenuously against those who say, I would argue actually that, for example, Greta Thunberg, bless her heart. Okay, she is all in favor of nuclear fusion and backed up by nuclear fission. Why? Because it's carbon free, and you can supply energy net and it's carbon free. Okay, I also am in favor of our getting nuclear fusion as well as nuclear fission, because nuclear fusion offers us unlimited energy for everyone on Earth forever, for all practical intents and purposes. That's the ultimate. And it's also carbon free, but it's interesting. Greta Thunberg and I both agree that nuclear fusion backed up by nuclear fission is the answer, but we agree for opposite reasons.
Wonderful. Well said. Jonathan, I would like to mention that she's not alone who is fighting the natural progress of industries. There are millions of people like yours, and it's almost like religion. They're not even trying to explain why they're standing for this or that.
Sasha, the anthropogenic climate change and their, in effect, worship of it is, in effect, it's like a secular religion.
Yes.
It's their substitute for God.
Now, another problem is that I read a few books of Yuval Harari, and he's saying in his books about climate control. He is for climate control, but he understands neither one country in the world can stop all issues associated with climate control. It has to be all countries. So unless you convince China or Russia or a few other, India maybe, some other,
they're going to continue.
Nothing, of course.
They're going to continue burning fossil fuels and pumping carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and you have to adjust to that. You have to we will continue have increasing crop yields because of the higher level of carbon dioxide, but that should not prohibit us from developing nuclear fusion backed up by nuclear fission. Because apparently if we look back at human history or recorded human history, every time that humanity has managed to develop a new energy source, whether it's coal or steam or other things, every time they develop a new source of energy, the result has been an explosion, a relative explosion in wealth. It creates more wealth. It creates more things to raise the standard of living for everyone. And so there are things that we can do very profitably. And so if for example, if, as many are predicting, if President Trump, in fact, wins the November election, it's not all bad. It's not. It really isn't. You have to look at the things that would result that are positive. And given the fact that the United States is not, and people tend to say, this is a threat to democracy. The United States is not and has never been a democracy. It was established as a constitutional republic, a very unique creation, because the founding fathers feared a pure democracy. because that would result in what they called the tyranny of the majority.
Yeah, exactly.
It said you had to be able to defend the rights of the minority at all times. That is why the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights had built into it the checks and balances system. That is, in the words of James Madison, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The United States political system was designed so that it could not move swiftly in one direction or the other, except in very rare circumstances where the president, say, can declare a state of national emergency, and the Constitution, in effect, gives him the power to do things in the short term, which is unique in the world system. And it also provides for that state of emergency to come to an end. The checks and balances system operating once again. So the situation is much more complex than most people are willing to admit. So with that in mind, I still contend that even in this narrowing window of opportunity for Ukraine, that they still have an opportunity to pull their own October surprise or even a November surprise and put the Russians in a serious position of disadvantage. And if South Korea comes in and joins the fight at the right time, we will find a very much changed strategic situation by the end of this year.
Well, the fact is that Ukraine is there to stay. It's not going to disappear. It's not going to lose or yield to Russians in any way, unless it would be collective decision of all NATO country, US and Ukraine, and everything will be strictly confirmed by everybody, and the mechanisms will be in place to guarantee exactly what type of agreement there will be, if there will be any agreement at all. And we'll see what's happened, what's next news about nuclear advancement of Ukraine. We'll obviously
that'll be very interesting if in fact Ukraine is able to pull it off. And that would absolutely catch everyone flat-footed.
Yeah, maybe Greta Thunberg could consult Ukrainians on nuclear use.
Greta Thunberg needs love.
Yeah,
she so needs a significant other. Really.
Yeah, it's about time. It's about time. Listen, Jonathan, thank you so much for today's conversation. And I'm looking forward to see you on Friday, same place, same time. And hopefully Ivan will join us. And therefore, all the best. And
by the way, Sasha, he is our best check because you see all these conflicting reports.
Yeah.
Oh, Ukraine's on the verge of collapse, or this Russia, and that's part of Russian disinformation. Ivan is very valuable to us in this.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
He is there on the spot. He can serve as a check on all the propaganda that is going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's very objective. And I understand how it's hard to be right on the ground in Kyiv these days.
Well, no kidding.
He is doing a wonderful job. And I'm really looking forward to see him back on Friday. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.